Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. The sky over Austin was a dull shade of gray when Mark Davis walked down the cracked sidewalk, his backpack heavy with books and unpaid bills. 23 years old, final year of law school, and drowning in debt left by his late father. Every step felt heavier than the last. His shoes were worn, the laces frayed, and his phone buzzed again with another payment reminder. He sighed, pushing it deeper into his pocket, pretending it was not there. He had 3 part-time jobs, 2 scholarships, and 0 luck. That night, as he sat hunched over a pile of case notes in the dim corner of a campus cafe, his phone lit up again, this time, an unknown number. Mark Davis speaking, he answered softly. A calm, commanding voice came through the speaker. Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I would like to meet with you regarding your financial situation. He frowned, confused. I am sorry, who are you? How do you know about I know enough, she interrupted smoothly. Meet me at Brooks Bistro at 7 o'clock tonight. It is important. Before he could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone, thinking it had to be some kind of prank. But as the clock struck 6:45, curiosity outweighed fear. He found himself standing outside Brooks Bistro, rain misting under the streetlight. Inside, the restaurant glowed warm and golden, filled with soft jazz and the clinking of silverware. At a corner table sat a woman in her early 70s, silver hair, sharp posture, eyes that held both authority and sorrow. Mr. Davis, she greeted, motioning for him to sit. I appreciate you coming. He hesitated but sat down, clutching his backpack like a shield. Mrs. Brooks, he said cautiously, how do you know me? She smiled faintly. I make it my business to know potential investments. And you, young man, are drowning. Tuition, rent, your mother's medical bills, I could list them all. Mark's chest tightened. What do you want from me? A marriage, she said simply, stirring her tea as if she had just asked for the weather. Mark froze, sure he had misheard. Excuse me? Her gaze never wavered. You heard me correctly. This is not about love or romance. It is a contract. You will marry me, and in exchange, I will settle all your debts and provide financial security for your family. The clinking of the spoon against porcelain was the only sound between them. Why me? He managed to ask. Because you are young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider it. I do not need affection, Mr. Davis. I need a partner in name only, someone who can stand beside me, sign documents, and keep appearances. Think of it as a transaction. He laughed softly, disbelief curling in his chest. That is insane. Is it? She countered calmly. You have 3 months left before you default on your loans. Your mother's medical care is in jeopardy. Your sister will lose her tuition. Sometimes insanity is the only door left open. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the window like a heartbeat. Mark looked down at his calloused hands. He thought of his mother's tired smile, his sister's dream of finishing school, the stack of bills waiting at home. I need time, he whispered. Of course, she replied, sipping her tea. But do not take too long. My offer has an expiration date. As Mark walked back into the night, his reflection blurred in the rain-slicked glass, one thought echoed in his head: had he just met his salvation, or sold his soul? Mark walked away from the bistro, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The rain had started to pour heavier, soaking through his jacket as he walked the quiet streets of Austin. He pulled his collar up, his thoughts racing. He couldn't fathom what Eleanor had proposed. A contract marriage? To a woman he had just met? It seemed like a twisted fairy tale, one where he was the prince in desperate need of a rescue. He thought about his mother, struggling with her illness, the mounting bills piling up at home, and his sister who was about to lose her scholarship. He had nothing left to lose, but still, the offer weighed on him. He didn't know what to think, didn't know what to do. But then, the thought of everything slipping away, of his family losing everything, pushed him forward. He needed a solution. He had no other option. Mark had always prided himself on doing things on his own, but now, for the first time in his life, he was willing to accept help, no matter how strange it seemed. He fumbled for his phone and dialed his mother's number. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice soft and full of weariness. "Mark? Is everything okay?" she asked. He paused, his throat tightening. "Mom, I met someone tonight. She's offering me a way out. A way to fix everything." He heard the quiet click of her breathing on the other end. "What do you mean, a way out?" She's offering me a marriage contract," he said, hating the words as they left his lips. "A marriage contract? Mark, that sounds crazy." Her voice was low, but there was a tremor of concern. He swallowed hard. "I know, Mom. I know. But think about it. It's the only way I can pay off everything. The debts, the medical bills, the house. We won't have to worry anymore." There was a long silence. Then she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Mark, you've always taken care of us. I've never asked you for anything. But this isn't the way. You don't need to do this." His heart sank. "I don't know what else to do. I'm out of time, Mom." She didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, the only sound was the rain tapping against the window. "Just promise me something," she said finally. "Promise me you'll think this through. Really think about it. Don't make a decision in haste." Mark nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I will, Mom. I promise." Hanging up, he stood there for a moment, staring at the streetlights reflected on the wet pavement. His mind spun with doubt, but one thing was clear: had to make a choice. He couldn't let his family fall apart. Not now. The next day, Mark found himself standing outside Brooks' Bistro again, his heart pounding in his chest. He had told Eleanor he needed time to think, but after the conversation with his mother, he knew what he had to do. The restaurant was quieter now, the lunch rush long gone, leaving the place bathed in a calm, almost eerie stillness. Eleanor was already there, sitting at the same table from the night before. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. Mark swallowed hard, walking toward her. He could feel the weight of his decision bearing down on him with every step. "Mr. Davis," she greeted him, her voice smooth as ever. "I see you've made up your mind." He nodded, taking a seat across from her. The quiet hum of the restaurant felt distant, almost surreal, as the reality of what he was about to do sank in. "I'm in," he said, his voice steady, though his hands were shaking slightly. Eleanor didn't look surprised. "Good," she said simply. "Then we can begin." Mark's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The start of a new life. A life where everything could change, for better or for worse. But the question was, would it be worth it? Was he really ready to give up everything he knew for a contract that promised him a future that seemed too good to be true? Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she looked at him, her gaze calculating yet soft. "This is more than just paperwork, Mr. Davis," she said, her voice lowering slightly. "This will change everything. You will be part of my world now. And there's no going back." Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had no idea what he was stepping into, but he didn't have the luxury of second-guessing anymore. The clock was ticking, and he was about to sign away his freedom for a chance at something better. Or maybe something worse. Only time would tell. Mark sat across from Eleanor, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a heavy stone. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. The restaurant was quieter now, the lunch rush long gone, leaving the soft hum of conversation as background noise. Eleanor's sharp eyes watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. Mark could feel the tension building between them, as if this moment would define the rest of his life. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. Eleanor's lips curled into a faint smile, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something human behind her steely demeanor. "Now," she began, her voice smooth as silk, "we begin the process. There are contracts to sign, arrangements to make. And then, you will officially be my husband, at least on paper." Mark swallowed hard. The words still didn't feel real. Marriage. To a woman he barely knew. But it was the only way out. The only way to save his family from the financial ruin that loomed over them. "And after that?" he asked, dreading the answer. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying him. "After that, you live your life as usual. There are no strings attached, no expectations beyond the contract. You will have everything you need: financial security, a place in my world. But you must remember, this is not a traditional marriage. There is no love here, no romance. Just business." Her words were cold, clinical, but they held a certain power in them. Mark nodded slowly, trying to push away the unease gnawing at him. He had come this far, and he couldn't back out now. "Understood," he replied, his voice firm. Eleanor's smile widened, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. Let's get started, then." The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of meetings, paperwork, and legalities. Mark found himself signing document after document, his mind still reeling from the decision he had made. He had always prided himself on being independent, on doing everything on his own, but now he was stepping into a world that felt foreign and out of reach. Eleanor's world. The power, the wealth, the luxury, it was all there, surrounding him like an impenetrable wall. He was just a pawn in her game, a necessary piece to help her secure her legacy. But as the days passed, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The more he learned about Eleanor's life, the more he began to question his decision. She was a woman who had built an empire, a woman who controlled everything and everyone around her. But despite her power, she was always alone. There were no family photos in her office, no personal touches in her home. Everything was sterile, perfectly curated, like a museum. It made Mark wonder what she was hiding. And then there were the moments when he caught her looking at him, as if she was waiting for something. It was a fleeting glance, but it stayed with him, lodged in his mind like an unanswered question. Why had she chosen him? What did she want from him beyond the contract? Late one night, as Mark sat in his small apartment, the weight of his thoughts kept him awake. His phone buzzed on the table beside him, and when he picked it up, he saw a message from Eleanor. It was simple, just a time and a place for their next meeting. But as he read it, a chill ran down his spine. There was something in the way she had written it, something that felt more like an order than a request. He had agreed to this arrangement, but he still wasn't sure what he was getting himself into. The next day, Mark stood outside the building where Eleanor had asked him to meet her. The glass doors gleamed in the afternoon sun, reflecting the city around him. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew that once he walked through those doors, his life would change forever. He walked inside, his steps echoing in the vast lobby. Eleanor was already there, waiting for him. She was dressed in a sleek black dress, her posture straight and commanding. She looked like she belonged in this world, like she owned it. Mark couldn't help but feel out of place. "Mr. Davis," she greeted him, her voice as smooth as ever. "I hope you're ready for what's coming next." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm ready." But as he followed her into the elevator, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this was all a mistake. That he had made a deal with the devil, and now there was no going back. The doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent, carrying him higher into the unknown. As the elevator doors slid open, Mark's heart raced, his palms sweaty as he followed Eleanor down the sleek hallway. The building was immaculate, every surface polished to perfection, from the marble floors to the towering glass windows that overlooked the city. It was a world so far removed from his own, a world where wealth and power were as common as air. Eleanor's heels clicked rhythmically against the floor, her stride confident and purposeful. Mark walked silently beside her, trying to keep up, his mind still spinning from the decision he had made. The heavy weight of the contract he had signed felt suffocating now, as though he had just walked into a trap he couldn't escape. Eleanor stopped in front of a large, polished wooden door. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This is your new life, Mr. Davis," she said, her voice cool and calm. "From here on, everything changes." Mark swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. He had told himself he was doing this for his family, for their future, but now, in the cold, sterile world Eleanor had brought him into, it all seemed so much more overwhelming than he had anticipated. He nodded, forcing a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "I understand." Eleanor pushed open the door, and they entered a large, beautifully decorated office. It was even more luxurious than the rest of the building, with rich velvet curtains, a giant mahogany desk, and framed photos of Eleanor with various business partners and world leaders. The room exuded power, control, and cold precision. She gestured for him to sit in one of the leather chairs opposite her desk. As he did, he couldn't help but feel like a child in a room full of giants. Eleanor sat down behind her desk, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "You will work with my team from now on," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "There are meetings to attend, decisions to be made. You will be part of the business, but never forget the agreement we have is not a personal one. We are not friends. We are not lovers. This is business, nothing more." Mark nodded again, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pushed further into a world where he didn't belong. "Understood," he said quietly. He wasn't sure what he was agreeing to anymore. He had thought that signing the contract would give him a sense of control, but now, sitting here in Eleanor's office, everything felt so far beyond his reach. Eleanor's gaze softened slightly, and for a brief moment, Mark wondered if she was just as lonely as he felt. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by that same cold, calculating look that had first drawn him in. "There are certain expectations," she continued, her tone now more measured. "You will maintain appearances at all times. The press will know we are married. There will be events, galas, meetings. You will be by my side. But you will keep your personal life separate from mine. Do you understand?" "Yes," Mark replied, though his stomach churned with unease. He had thought the arrangement would be simple, a way out of his financial troubles. But now, with Eleanor's words hanging in the air, he realized just how complicated this all was going to be. It was more than a business deal. It was a life he couldn't take back once he stepped into it. As the meeting went on, Mark's mind kept drifting. Eleanor spoke about contracts, events, and duties, but all he could think about was his mother's face, his sister's dream of becoming a doctor, and the price he had paid to be here. Was it worth it? He wasn't sure anymore. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, gala events, and endless paperwork. Mark's life became a constant cycle of appearances and obligations. He was introduced as Eleanor's husband, though no one ever treated him as such. He was a shadow, always in the background, always the quiet observer. He stayed in a guest suite in her penthouse, a beautiful, cold space that felt more like a prison than a home. Eleanor was always there, but they never talked about their marriage. They never talked about anything personal. It was always about the business, the image, the public face they had to uphold. The more time Mark spent with her, the more he began to wonder what she really wanted. She was kind to him at times, but only in the way a business partner would be. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on beneath the surface, something she wasn't telling him. And then one night, after a particularly draining event, Mark found himself standing alone on the balcony of the penthouse, staring out at the city below. He had been walking around in circles for weeks, trying to keep his emotions in check, but tonight, everything came crashing down. The weight of the contract, the coldness of his new life, and the loneliness he felt in the middle of it all felt too much to bear. He didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. As he leaned against the railing, Eleanor stepped out onto the balcony, her heels clicking against the floor. She stood beside him, silent for a long moment, before speaking softly. "You're thinking about leaving, aren't you?" Mark turned to her, surprised. "I'm not sure I can do this anymore," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes softening for the first time. "You made a choice," she said quietly. "But you can still change your mind." Mark stared out at the city, the lights flickering below like tiny stars. He didn't know if he could change his mind, but for the first time since he had signed that contract, he wondered if he should. Mark stood there, staring out at the city lights below, feeling the weight of Eleanor's words press against him like a suffocating cloud. He had made a choice, he had signed the contract, but the consequences of that decision were becoming clearer with every passing day. His life, once his own, now felt like a series of moments orchestrated by someone else. Eleanor's world was cold, calculated, and pristine. The luxury, the wealth, the power, it all surrounded him like a fortress, but it was a fortress he had no key to. He didn't belong here. And for the first time since he entered this strange contract, he wasn't sure if he ever would. Eleanor stood beside him in silence, the soft breeze brushing her face, but she didn't look at him. She was always composed, always in control, but in that moment, he could see a crack in her armor. She had chosen this path for herself, but Mark wasn't sure if she had ever considered what it would cost him. "You know," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant, "you don't have to stay if you don't want to." Mark turned toward her, his heart beating faster. "What do you mean?" "I'm in this. I signed the papers. I agreed." Eleanor's eyes met his for the first time in what felt like days, and for the briefest moment, there was something vulnerable in her gaze. "I didn't expect you to be happy here. I didn't expect you to fall in love with this life. I know this is not what you thought it would be." Her words caught him off guard. He had spent so much time trying to understand what was happening, trying to figure out his place in this strange arrangement, that he hadn't stopped to think about her. Why had she asked him to do this? Why had she chosen him? Was it about the business, or was it something else? "So, what now?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "I'm trapped, aren't I? In a life I never asked for, with a woman I barely know, and a future that's not really mine." Eleanor took a step closer to him, her presence both comforting and unsettling. "I never promised you happiness, Mark," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I promised you security. A way out of the mess you were in. But now, I see that you're not the only one caught in this." Mark blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "You think I'm using you for the business. That I don't care about you. But you're wrong." She paused, her lips pressing together as if she were gathering the courage to say something she had been holding back. "I don't need a contract or a marriage to make my empire grow. I've built everything from the ground up. I didn't need anyone," but she trailed off, and Mark could see the faintest tremor in her hands. "But I still wanted someone," she finished quietly. Mark felt a pang in his chest, an ache that he hadn't expected. For all her wealth, all her power, Eleanor was still a woman who had built her life alone. "I don't know what you want from me," Mark said, his voice shaking slightly. Eleanor's gaze softened, and for the first time, she reached out and touched his arm. "I want what you want," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone to stand beside me. To share the burden of all this. To share the silence, the loneliness. I don't want to be alone anymore, Mark." Mark's heart hammered in his chest, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. He had thought Eleanor was just another powerful businesswoman using him to get what she wanted, but now, he saw her in a different light. She was just like him, lonely, desperate for connection. The realization hit him like a wave, and everything inside him shifted. He had come into this contract expecting nothing more than money, security, and a way out of his problems. But what if it was about something more? What if he wasn't just a pawn in her game? What if this was the start of something he hadn't even considered? He looked into Eleanor's eyes, and for the first time, he saw vulnerability there. Not the cold, detached woman he had known for weeks, but a person who had built walls around herself, walls that no one had ever tried to break down. "I didn't know," Mark whispered. "I didn't know you felt this way." Eleanor stepped back, breaking the connection. "It's not important," she said, her voice steady again, though there was still a trace of emotion in it. "What matters now is that you understand. This marriage, this contract is more than just business for me. I need you, Mark. Whether you stay or go, that's the truth." Mark stood there, unsure of what to say. His mind was spinning, his heart racing. He had come here to escape his old life, but now, he wasn't sure where he was going. The future, once so clear, was now clouded with uncertainty. Was he ready to embrace this new life with Eleanor? Was he ready to take the chance and build something real, or would he walk away and risk everything? He didn't know the answer, but one thing was certain: couldn't keep running from the truth any longer. Mark stood there, still processing everything Eleanor had said. Her words had shaken him, but they also made him question everything he thought he knew. The weight of their arrangement had always felt like a business deal, cold, impersonal, and driven by necessity. But now, in this quiet moment, he began to realize that there was more to it than he had ever imagined. Eleanor wasn't just a businesswoman using him as a pawn. She was a person, just like him, seeking something more. Connection. Companionship. He had felt the same way when he had signed the contract, desperate for a way out, but now he was wondering if that was enough. Could they find something real in the midst of all the lies and expectations? He looked at her, her eyes soft but still guarded, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of hope in her expression. Maybe she wasn't as cold and unfeeling as he had believed. Maybe this whole arrangement could be more than just a way to escape his debts and her loneliness. But the fear still lingered, fear that he would lose himself in this world of wealth and power, that he would become nothing more than a shadow of the man he used to be. "I don't know if I can do this," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep pretending like this is okay." Eleanor's gaze softened, and she took a step closer to him. "You don't have to pretend," she said gently. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself." Her words hit him harder than he expected. For weeks, he had been living a lie, trying to fit into a world that wasn't his. He had tried to play the part of a husband, of a partner, but it felt like a mask that he couldn't take off. Eleanor had seen through it, and now she was giving him a chance to be honest. To be real. But could he do it? Could he let down his guard and trust her, trust this arrangement, trust himself? "I don't know how to be anything else," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent so long pretending to be someone I'm not, I don't even know who I am anymore." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and comforting. "You're still you, Mark," she said softly. "No matter what happens, no matter what this contract becomes, you're still the person who chose to help your family. The person who made a decision for the right reasons. Don't lose sight of that." Her words stirred something deep inside him, a flicker of hope that he hadn't realized he had been holding on to. Maybe he wasn't trapped in this life. Maybe there was a way to take control, to make this work. But it wasn't going to be easy. They both had walls to break down, and it would take time, patience, and a willingness to change. Eleanor stepped back, her eyes never leaving his. "I can't promise that this will be easy, Mark. But I can promise that I will be here, by your side, through it all." He looked at her, his heart racing. He had always been afraid of what this life would turn into, afraid of losing himself in her world. But now, for the first time, he was starting to see a glimmer of something else, something more than just business, more than just a way out. It was a chance at something real. Something he had never expected. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice uncertain but hopeful. Eleanor smiled, a small, genuine smile that didn't just reach her lips but her eyes. "Now, we take it one step at a time." The next few weeks were a blur of events, meetings, and adjustments. Mark had agreed to stay, to try and make this arrangement work. Eleanor's team welcomed him into their world, though he was still the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit. But the more he worked with them, the more he began to realize that this world wasn't as cold and impersonal as he had thought. He wasn't just a husband in name, he was becoming a part of something bigger. He started to understand the intricacies of Eleanor's business, her vision, and how it all fit together. He even began to admire her determination, her strength, and the way she had built everything from the ground up. They still didn't talk much about their marriage, but there were small moments that felt real. When they shared a quiet dinner after a long day of meetings, or when they exchanged a look during a particularly stressful event, Mark began to see the cracks in Eleanor's facade. She wasn't just a woman hiding behind her wealth and power. She was someone who had worked hard, sacrificed, and now, like him, was trying to find something more. And slowly, very slowly, Mark began to let go of his fears. He started to believe that this arrangement, this strange contract, might just be the beginning of something he hadn't expected. He didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Weeks passed, and Mark found himself slowly settling into this new life with Eleanor. He was still unsure where it was all heading, but something was changing inside him. He had begun to see Eleanor not just as the powerful businesswoman who had saved him from his financial ruin, but as a person, someone who, like him, was carrying the weight of expectations. They still hadn't spoken much about their marriage, but there were subtle moments, quiet exchanges, that made Mark realize there was more to their connection than just business. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Mark was sitting in the living room of their shared penthouse, his mind still occupied with work. Eleanor entered, her heels clicking softly on the floor. She had changed out of her formal attire into something more comfortable, but her presence was still commanding. She looked at him, her eyes softening for a moment before she spoke. "Mark," she said quietly, "we need to talk." He turned to her, his heart skipping a beat. "About what?" She hesitated, her fingers playing with the edge of her sleeve. "I know this marriage was never supposed to be about love. But I can't help feeling like, maybe we've been avoiding the one thing that's been growing between us." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected this conversation. He had spent so much time convincing himself that their arrangement was purely transactional, but now, standing in front of him, Eleanor seemed different, vulnerable, almost uncertain. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice soft. "You and I," Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "we're not just going through the motions anymore. There's something real here, something I didn't plan for." Mark's heart raced. He hadn't been sure if he was imagining things or if Eleanor was feeling the same shift, but now it seemed undeniable. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words got stuck in his throat. He wasn't sure how to navigate this new territory between them. Eleanor took a step closer, her gaze steady but gentle. "I'm not asking for love, Mark," she said, "but I think we need to acknowledge what's happening. This isn't just a business arrangement anymore. It's more than that." Mark nodded slowly, his chest tightening. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I never thought I'd end up here, in this life, with you. But something about you makes me think I can make this work. I can see myself in this world, with you, even if I'm not sure what it all means yet." Eleanor's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch his arm. "We don't need to have all the answers right now. But I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try, to see where this can go." Mark felt a rush of emotions flooding through him. The fear, the uncertainty, the doubts, they were all still there, but there was something else, too. A hope, a small but undeniable spark of something more than just a business deal. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt like he wasn't just surviving, was living. The next few days were quiet, but different. There was a subtle shift between them. They began to spend more time together, not just at business events or in meetings, but in the small moments. Sharing a quiet dinner, laughing over something silly, or just sitting together in comfortable silence. It wasn't love not yet, but it was the beginning of something. They were slowly building a foundation, brick by brick, and for the first time, Mark felt a sense of belonging he hadn't expected. It wasn't the life he had imagined when he first walked into Eleanor's world, but it was becoming something he could accept, something he could embrace. They still had a long way to go, and there would be challenges ahead. But Mark had made a choice, and he was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was where he was meant to be. The contract had started as a way out, but now, it felt like the first step toward something new, something real. And as he stood there, next to Eleanor, the weight that had once felt so heavy on his shoulders seemed a little lighter, the future a little less uncertain. As the weeks passed, Mark's life began to take on a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't what he had expected when he first signed that contract, but it was real. He found himself spending more time with Eleanor, getting to know her beyond the business meetings and the cold, calculated woman he had met at the beginning. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when the weight of their arrangement would hang between them like an unspoken truth. But there was something else to a connection, small but growing. One evening, after another high-profile event that had exhausted them both, Mark and Eleanor found themselves back at the penthouse. The city lights below twinkled through the large windows, casting a soft glow over the room. Eleanor was standing by the window, her eyes distant, lost in thought. Mark watched her for a moment, sensing that something was on her mind. Slowly, he walked over to her, his footsteps quiet against the polished floor. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice tentative. She turned to face him, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. There was no need for words, the silence between them was comfortable now, filled with understanding. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "About what we're doing here. About us." Mark felt his heart race at the words. He had been wondering the same thing. Was this really just a business arrangement? Or was there something more developing between them? "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped closer to him, her presence almost overwhelming. "I think we've both been holding back," she said, her eyes searching his. "I know I've kept my distance, and I know you've done the same. But what if we could be more than what we've agreed to be?" Mark's mind raced. He had been so focused on the practicalities of their arrangement that he hadn't stopped to consider the possibility of something more. But now, standing here with her, he felt a shift, a pull that he couldn't ignore. "You mean, like a real marriage?" he asked, unsure if that was even possible. Eleanor's gaze softened, and she reached out, gently touching his arm. "Maybe not a traditional marriage," she said, her voice filled with uncertainty, "but something real. Something that's not just about appearances or business. Something that's about us, about building something together." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Mark didn't know what to say. He had always been afraid of this. Afraid of opening himself up, of letting someone else in. But now, with Eleanor standing in front of him, the fear didn't seem so strong. Maybe it wasn't about the contract anymore. Maybe it was about trust. "I don't know if I can promise you everything," Mark said slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes." Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile that Mark hadn't seen often, and it made his heart swell. "That's all I'm asking for," she said softly. "We'll take it one step at a time. No expectations, no pressure. Just us." And so, for the first time since they had signed that contract, Mark felt a sense of peace. They were both taking a risk, stepping into unknown territory, but they were doing it together. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be perfect, but it was real. As they stood there, in the quiet of their shared space, Mark felt the weight of his doubts begin to lift. He wasn't trapped anymore. He was free to build something new with Eleanor, something that might not be love in the traditional sense, but something that was real nonetheless. The next morning, they sat down together in the penthouse, talking not about contracts or appearances, but about the future. They talked about their hopes, their fears, and the kind of life they wanted to build. It wasn't easy, and there were still many questions left unanswered, but for the first time in a long while, Mark felt like he was no longer just a passenger in his own life. He was finally starting to take the wheel. The contract had started as a way out of his problems, but now it was becoming something else entirely, something that had the potential to change everything. And as they spoke, Mark realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something truly life-changing. A chance to find meaning, to find connection, and to build a life that was his own, with Eleanor by his side. As the days passed, Mark and Eleanor's relationship continued to evolve. It was no longer just about the contract, about the facade they had built around their marriage. It was real now, grounded in understanding and mutual respect. They had found something in each other that neither had expected. It wasn't love in the traditional sense, but it was something deeper, something that connected them on a level neither of them had imagined when they first signed those papers. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Mark and Eleanor were sitting together in the penthouse, the city lights twinkling below them. The air between them was easy, comfortable. There were no walls, no expectations, just the two of them, finally seeing each other for who they were. "Mark," Eleanor said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. He turned toward her, his heart light. "Yes?" "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with meaning. Mark looked at her for a long moment, his thoughts drifting back to when they first met, when everything seemed so complicated, so uncertain. "All the time," he admitted. "I never thought I'd be here, sitting with you, feeling like this. But somehow, here we are." Eleanor smiled, her eyes softening. "And I'm glad we are," she said, her voice sincere. Mark smiled back, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. He had come into this marriage looking for a way out, for a solution to his problems. But now, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. He was building something, not just with Eleanor, but with himself. The fears and doubts that had haunted him when he first walked into this life were fading, replaced by a sense of purpose. He wasn't just in this for the security anymore. He was in it because, in some strange way, he had found a place for himself in this world. "You know," Mark said, his voice thoughtful, "I never thought this would be my life. But somehow, it's starting to feel like it's where I'm supposed to be." Eleanor's smile widened, and she reached out, taking his hand. "It's not perfect, Mark. Nothing ever is. But it's real. And I think that's what matters." He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. For the first time, he felt like he had a future that was his to shape, not one dictated by fear or obligation. The weight of the past had begun to lift, replaced by a new sense of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be challenges ahead, but Mark was no longer afraid. He wasn't trapped by his choices, he was free to create his own path. And as they sat together in the quiet of the penthouse, Mark realized that, in a strange way, the contract had led him to exactly where he needed to be. It had started as a way to escape, but it had become the beginning of something new. It had given him the chance to rebuild his life, and in doing so, it had also given him the chance to rebuild his connection with Eleanor. There were still many questions ahead, but for the first time, Mark felt ready to face them. He wasn't alone anymore. And that was all he had ever really wanted. He smiled, looking out at the city once more. It was a new beginning, not just for him, but for both of them. Together, they could face whatever the future held.